So while y'all were starting your project, I did a handful of thumbnail sketches myself, very, very quick. So the thumbnail sketch is really meant to just give you a basic idea of where the objects are located. My eye tends to go toward this composition here, in which the mannequin head is over to the right, so his line of sight is looking in toward the center. It's got a nice sense of kind of empty space in between the Spider-Man figurine and the mannequin head. There's other options on here that I like as well. I might play around with this one, where the mannequin head is at the left-hand edge and there's a little empty space there in the middle. But I want you to see, again, how this works to enlarge. If you look closely, you can see that there's an X on top of the design from top left to bottom right, from top right to bottom left corner. And I've replicated that on a large piece of drawing paper. So if you take a look at this, try to back up a little bit, you can see that I've put that same X from top left to bottom left to top right. And I am now using that guide to help me enlarge this image. So the placement of that center point sort of divides where the Spider-Man figure is from where the head is, the mannequin head. So I know that center point divides into these two sections. So I can use the thumbnail sketch to very, very quickly enlarge what I'm doing. But what I want to work on, truly, is the value. And I want to show you how that works with the charcoal. To do that, I'm going to raise the lights again so that I have the same shadows to play with that you guys do. Okay. You can still see that drawing, I think, fairly well. So I'm using compressed charcoal. And compressed charcoal, trying to put it near the camera, there we go, is basically superheated wood that's been put under a lot of pressure, compressed into this kind of brick shape. It is essentially a big rectangular solid. And I can use it literally laying it flat on my drawing. And just moving it left and right is going to leave a little bit of charcoal behind that I can play with. So what I normally do when I'm starting with one of these drawings is to squint at the subject so I can see the darkest areas and the lightest areas. I've got a lot of highlight right here on his neck, but there's a fairly significant shadow right under the chin. So I'm just going to lay that in quickly. There's a big shadow right under the eyebrow, beside the eye socket. Same on the other side that sort of defines the bridge of the nose. There's some shadow underneath the nose itself. Upper lip, shadow under the lower lip. See how that's starting to turn into a face almost immediately? So I'm just playing with the values that I'm seeing on there, light and dark. But I can also start to work on the fact that to this side of his head, that is the blue fabric. So to really make this appear three-dimensional, I'm going to go in and add in that blue fabric. Made it darker than it probably needs to be. I can blend it. And I can manipulate with my eraser. So I can go back in and carve into this to refine the shapes of the nose, the lips. So now by defining the value of that fabric behind his head, I can start to make the head stand out as a fully three-dimensional shape. There is a bit of shadow behind his neck, but it's nowhere near as dark. I can shape the charcoal with the eraser so that I'm kind of stroking the charcoal with the eraser in the direction of the contours that I'm drawing. I can manipulate the sizes of things if they're too big. to make them smaller. I can play with the fabric. This is probably an important one if you're having trouble with the fabric. If you look at this area over here, I've got the figure of the kind of Spider-Man figurine thing. There's a drape right behind him that divides into some basic triangular shapes. In the deepest part of the fold, you have the darkest part of the value. So I'm going to lay that in pretty dark black. And then blend it out as I move toward the peak of that fold. So you notice I'm kind of stroking the charcoal in the direction of the cross contour of that fabric. I'm going to pop in the highlight on the top of the fold, blend it a little bit by erasing some. This next piece of fabric right beside it, almost always the next fold has its lightest area, its peak, right beside the shadow of the fold beside it. So we need a peak that fades into a deep recess there to make this more believable. And suddenly I start to have what looks to be a piece of fabric with light and shadow on it, much more quickly than I was able to do with the hatching and cross hatching. Now, what if you make a mistake? Megan was mentioning earlier that these erasers can be really versatile. This is your kneaded eraser, and it looks kind of like a piece of wadded up chewing gum. And in fact, that's what it's meant to look like. When it is being used, you notice it starts to pick up a lot of the charcoal from my drawing, from my hands. So to clean it, you literally pull it apart like silly putty, stick it back together. That gets some of the charcoal and graphite to fall out, and it cleans the eraser. So now I'm able to have a little bit cleaner surface. I can shape it any which way I want to. So I can make it into a really tight point, which will allow me to do a really small erasing in a very small area. But even more importantly, check this out. What if I've made an object? I'm going to make a value here on this vase. The dark side of the vase is on the right-hand side here. But what happens if, oh crap, I've made the whole thing too dark? I can literally take this compressed or a kneaded eraser, spread it out kind of like silly putty, like a little pancake. And I can press it. Take a look at this. I can push it into the paper. I'm not scrubbing back and forth. I'm literally pushing straight down. As I push on that, it's going to pick up some charcoal from below. Look what happens. When I peel back, can you see how that's lighter? I can keep doing that, and it will allow me to lighten an area without destroying any of the marks that I've made. So if you've made something that has a lot of detail but it's too dark, press and lift with your kneaded erasers. The eraser itself is probably your second most important tool out here other than the charcoal. You can use the white style erasers also to kind of help you create the feeling of contours on your objects. But think about the value beside the objects. How I can make this seem more three-dimensional by putting in the shadow of the fabric right behind that object. So that's what you're looking to do with this drawing, is to try to create a feeling of believable three-dimensional forms. So we've got bunches of charcoal over here. If you don't have your own, feel free to take from what we have on hand. There's more where that came from. These are the charcoal compressed sticks here in this black box. There are also charcoal pencils. I caution you not to use them until the end of the project when you get down to your details. If you start with a charcoal pencil, it'll take you a lot longer to fill in areas that are dark. But feel free to take charcoal from classroom stock. Your tuition paid for it. It is yours.